want to make sure that well, if they rate
oh yeah,
I'll like look this way.
Do you want me to try to look in the corner?
Do you want John so they can ask questions, or do you want to have a speak at the end? I think, given that there are people on Zoom, we'll probably just wait until the end. But I can page backwards and so. Great.
CC will have diagraphs so that you.
Okay, super. Yeah, if I have my back to people, just let me know. Yeah, people raise their hand and I'm ignoring. So, should we go ahead and get started, or do you want to wait a couple minutes? Do you feel like anybody's not here?
I should
be here.
I think that we'll have a lot of folks signing.
Okay. Great. Okay. So I'll go ahead and get started. If you can't hear me, if I'm not talking loud enough, just let me know. I'll try and talk as loudly as I can. I'm Heidi Agler. I drove up from Denver this morning, this sort of morning, afternoon. I am with a company called Root Policy. We're a Denver-based women-owned business. We specialize in housing studies, housing needs assessments, market analyses, strategic plans. We also do quite a bit of fair housing work, or did many years ago. We were contracted by Lake County to conduct a housing needs assessment. This is an update to a study that was done about 5 years ago, I think, pre-COVID, 2019. And I'm going to give you an overview of our findings. The draft is circulating in PDF. We've already gotten some comments from some folks. We certainly welcome more. The objective today is for me to share what I know and what we put in and what we provided to the county and the city of Leadville. But I'm interested in your feedback and questions. And so this is a draft. We're not ready to finalize yet until we get comments. So feel free to be generous in your questions, criticisms, contributions. I think because we've got so many people on Zoom, I will go ahead and go through the presentation and then you can ask questions. So just make notes and we can scroll back through if you want to see particular slides. So this gives you an idea of the contents of the needs assessment. We start with demographic, and this is how I'm going to present today too. We start with demographic and economic trends, a bit about housing inventory. I'll talk about some quirks in your inventory and the data, housing affordability and needs. We'll also touch on stakeholder engagement. We did a lot of interviews with individuals. And then we had a resident survey, a community survey in the field. I hope you all took it. I'll share the results from that survey as well. This document, we're starting to do this a lot more with clients. This is the executive summary. It consolidates everything that we've learned. We also have a very long report with key findings at the front of each chapter. So let's start with demographic trends. Yeah.
Could you move the screen of the Zoom participants?
Oh yeah, it's kind of in the way, huh? Let me see if I can do that. If somebody can help me do it. Anybody know how? Let's see. Yeah. What if I put it like there?
Oh yeah.
You can even minimize it so that it's just like this way. Okay. Great. So and I'm actually just a tiny bit so I can see a little better. So I'm looking at you. So Lake County's population, when we look at like total population and what the state demographer tells us is your population, these are permanent residents. So it excludes vacationers, excludes second homeowners. Hasn't changed very much since 2010. It's about 7,400. But when we start to dig a little bit deeper and look at the composition of the population, so who has changed here, we see a lot of how your population has changed. We saw a lot of movement in and out of the county, and I'll talk about that. And why that's happening. Overall, the folks who are living here, who are permanent residents, who are captured in that population number, they have higher household income. We're certainly seeing that among renters. We believe, and the data really signal to us, particularly for your Hispanic population, the influx of higher income households has displaced low income households. So people may have lost their units because they converted to a short-term rental, they converted to a second home, they converted to a permanent home occupied by higher income households. This happens when there's insufficient housing to accommodate both. We took a look at your household composition, so how people are living together. Between 2010 and 2022, the number of married couples with children and other types of family households declined, and married couples with children, that should say without children, sorry, and people living alone increased. And you'll see that in your school data that your enrollment has been on a declining trend as well. To that point, your school enrollment is 81% of what it was in 2019. And then, as I said earlier, we're tracking the Hispanic population decline by 400 people between 2010 and 2022. You're a little place, and that's a big number. So when we think about how those affect housing needs and sort of what are the drivers for needing housing, employment's a big driver. Your employment data are a little curious because the mine is a single large employer and they don't report for confidentiality reasons some of the data that we'd like to see. So just acknowledging that, we had to rely a lot on the survey to get wage information and income information. Yeah.
Is it okay to take questions on during, or do you want to wait?
If you have, go ahead and ask if you have one. I'll probably get the Zoom folks afterwards because it's easier to do that.
I'm on that side about rising income.
Yeah.
And it does seem like, given that like decline in Hispanic residents, I mean, it seems pretty clear that people are actually moving out. But I was curious, like, to some extent, are people making more?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We don't know because I don't have to be able to do that. I'd have to have income tax data and I'd have to be able to track people. So all I'm doing is looking at movements of households across income categories.
Yeah, it seems pretty clear. There's only been some, but also kind of mean some places have raised wages 20-30%.
Exactly. So. Yeah, it is true that people are making more as well, and that then they might be boosting different income groups. But I think when we see sort of that your composition of your population's changed, we see some displacement with people who tend to have lower incomes. We can conclude that there has or loss of certain demographics. We can conclude there's been some displacement.
Yeah. And related, I wasn't sure if that income data, and that's over 10 or 12 years, is that adjusted for inflation?
It is, yeah. And I should note that so you're a small county, and the data that we use, we get some of it from the demographer. They get the data and they do some magic with it to make it more reflective of Colorado. So they're relying on census data as well, but they've got their own models. For some of these other categories, we are relying on census data, and then we're supplementing that with the resident survey, but that's our best data. Because you're small, you're covering a 5-year period. So when I say 2022, I really mean an average of 2019 to 2022. So.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And we do have a question online, so yes. It's up to you if you want to.
If you can see it, you can ask it, or they can ask it. Yeah, if we can do it that way, that's great. Thank you.
So it's Mateo.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mateo.
I had a question about so you mentioned 400 Hispanic individuals moved out. Do you know a way to make sure that that number is accurate? I'm thinking of folks who don't like to answer census data points, or undocumented families who don't want to be counted. How are you able to kind of keep them, or kind of factor in that missing number?
Yeah, I don't have a way to do that. And if I went back and looked at fluctuation between the 2000 census, 2010 and 2022, I'd see more of that fluctuation that's due to how the census asked the question and how that question was marketed to people who answered it. So we see this both with the Hispanic population and also Native American population. Some people want to identify their ethnicity is where you identify your Hispanic ethnicity in the census. And it's a separate question from race. So if you have the option to identify your race and your ethnicity, if you choose to, we see a lot of fluctuation among racial categories between other and white for the Hispanic population. The other thing the census doesn't do very well is capture mixed race people and mixed race couples and 2 or more races. It's a huge growth area, not only in the United States, but in Colorado as well. And so I am drawing from what the census is telling me. And so I would say that's not wholly representative of what could be going on. But I don't have another way, back to kind of a comment about incomes. I don't have a better way of doing that unless we would have fielded a survey in 2010 and in 2022.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. So I'll talk a little bit about employment and sort of your fluctuations in employment. You had a big increase in employment with the mine, the reopening of the mine, and then that was coupled with expansion of tourism. Leadville, Lake County becoming like the next cool place where I should buy a second home, where I can recreate. That was kind of the perfect storm because you didn't build a lot of housing to accommodate that. Most common jobs that we see in Lake County are typically lower to moderate wage jobs. So food and accommodation, that's a supporting industry for your tourism industry, healthcare and social services, both supporting the local residents, but also supporting people who come here to recreate, and then education, and then construction. So this is where things get a little bit interesting with Lake County, and you're very unique in this regard. Most folks who live here are employed outside of the county. That really hasn't changed much in the past decade. You are a bedroom community. You provide workforce to both Eagle and to Summit counties. That's pretty well documented. I think you all know that. You probably experienced that. And this really hasn't changed. We also took a look at work from home households. This is self-reported data. I think it's underestimating how many people truly work from home, but your number's really small and it hasn't changed much from 2016. So we took a look at when households moving into the county and from where they came. 40% came from a different state. That's pretty big. 30% came from nearby counties, Summit, Eagle, Jefferson, as well as Denver. And then 30% came from other counties in the state.
All right, just on the remote worker, you said it's self-reported, so
this is gonna be self-reported in the census.
in the census.
Yeah, it's not a variable that we get, I think, frequently. I think it's gonna be, I'll double check. Yeah,
because it's definitely something that we hear a lot of anecdotally, is that there's this massive rise in remote workers.
Yeah,
it's lower than what it was in 2016. So I just would love to be able to fact check that and be able to validate that when I talk to folks about this massive rise in remote workers.
I was surprised that the number was at low too. I'll take that. We can talk about that when we get to the survey too. Results. So just to kind of give you some visuals, what I'm going to do is summarize the points and then give you some supporting visuals to back that up. I want to just be clear, these are households, not residents. So when I was talking about that 7,400 in terms of people, these are households. Income is reported as households. And I just think it's so interesting to see, with people earning, or households earning less than 25,000, you've definitely seen a decrease there, excuse me. Certainly 25 to 35, not a whole lot of folks reporting that income range. Big drop in 35 to 50. And where we see the increase is here. And those are really large increases. So households owning 100,000 and more, and particularly 150 and more. So when you ask the question of, could this be due to people's wage increases? Maybe, but probably not a jump that big, unless, good job. Like you got a really big increase, you tripled your wages. It could be due to household formation. So if I have two people who are earning 35 to 50, let's say they're both earning 50, they form a household, then they're bouncing up to this category. So that dynamic's going on too. Oh, sorry. And these are owners. Here's your ownership. And then here's your rental shift. And this is where I think I'm pretty confident, because this number's dropped so much for your extremely low income renters. That's where I think there's been displacement. I don't think these folks, and they may have gotten an increase to get to here, but I think they left the county from what I can tell. That's a really big decrease. So this is a classic reporting of data where we look at, this is sort of confusing, what jobs by industry are in Lake County and where the people who live in Lake County, so that permanent residents, where they work. And we line those up to see how well Lake County is sort of supplying the jobs that people are working in. And you can see it's kind of off. So the primary jobs of Lake County residents, right here, 643, these are workers, are in accommodation and food services, but there are only 208 jobs within the county. So these are the folks who are driving to Summit and to Eagle to work. That's also true of retail trade, healthcare and social assistance, Where you're pretty well aligned is educational services. People are also leaving the county to go to construction jobs. That makes a lot of sense. That's a very transient type of employment. Public administration, it goes down from there, but overall, there's this sort of out-migration, large out-migration to jobs in other counties. And this shows the shift in the number of residents who are employed outside the county. So continued increase. These are our workers who work from home. So this is the trend. This would be census data because we don't have this annually, but this is showing you both the percent, which is the green, as well as the number and sort of those trends. And I do think this is curious. I would have expected it to continue to go up. It could be a reporting issue. It could also be the shift, your demographic shift toward, let's say, baby boomer couples who are coming here to partially retire, and the people who are working from home and renting are no longer doing that here. Let's talk a little bit about housing inventory. You have about 4,500 housing units. That's as of 2022. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'll show you some graphics that demonstrate your construction. You have overall, you have fairly low volume of units. You don't build a lot, and you haven't really returned to pre-recession levels. That's unusual. In most communities in which we work, we saw a stop in the Great Recession in the mid-2000s. Things really, really slowed down, but most have caught up. So most of the construction since 2000 has taken place outside the city of Leadville. Kind of one of the interesting things that's happened is that in the county, we're seeing a gain in housing units, but you're maintaining a stable population. So if you're growing units, but you're not growing people and workers, that tells me that those are occupied by second homeowners in their vacation homes. Otherwise, you'd be a little more imbalanced, and I wouldn't be seeing rents and prices go up as much. You're one of those cases that likes to build, one of those places likes to build single family homes and almost exclusively build single family homes. So not a lot of multi-family construction, not a lot of what we call attached or missing middle construction is going on here. We did took a little look at your licensed short-term rentals. Unlike what we see in Summit County, where it's just kind of continually going up, you've got this sort of cyclical licensing kind of up and down with short-term rental listings, but they haven't gone up dramatically. And there's not as big of a proportion of your housing stock as I thought. Over 90% of your vacant units are in short-term rental occupancy or used as short-term rentals. Very, very few are for sale or for rent. So if I'm out shopping around, I can't find much.
In the city of Leadville.
This is in the city. Yep.
Yeah. So that's saying that, I mean, what are you classifying a vacant unit? As far as a second homeowner unit, is that considered a vacant unit?
That would be vacant unit, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And where's that data coming from?
This is a combination of what's being reported through the ACS and what we received from Leadville for the registry. That seems
It feels
odd. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take a look at that. Definitely.
Would a unit that's being long-term rented be considered vacant?
No. Only if it's vacant for rent. If it's actively vacant for rent.
So the vacant houses are not a primary residence. They're not a long-term rental.
They're being used as vacation for the most part as vacation.
So then that number would make sense.
Yeah, that number makes a lot of sense.
Because it's like.
It's just the classification alone creates.
I think this may be the short-term rental piece here. I think it should probably be short-term and sort of vacation occupancy, but I'll double check that.
If you use that number, if you're saying that 13% of the houses in Leadville are allowed to be short-term rentals, then you're saying there's a really small number of houses that are second home. Because if 90% of vacant houses are short-term rentals, but those short-term rentals only equate to 13% of the city, that's saying there's hardly any
That doesn't feel right
second
to me.
homes in the city, which is not.
So maybe more than the county.
I just don't
No,
think that's.
No,
170 licenses in the city.
I think that's misinterpreting it a little bit. It's this overall units, 13% of overall units are licensed to have short-term rental potential for second homeowners, meaning that non-primary residents, I should clarify. That means that there's 171 or 165.
What was currently.
Yeah. 171 short-term rental units that exist in Lake County that is considered vacant, but then there's also, in addition to that, homes that people use as vacation homes or just have
Which
here
would not be part of that 171.
that sit just
Okay.
as vacant units. And it's saying that only about 10% of the units are being utilized as anything other than a short-term rental or a completely, or sorry, that are only 10% of the units are being sold or sitting completely vacant with no buyer, no any, or so I think that's a fair.
Okay, I'll take a look at the data just to make sure everybody's comfortable with that too, and I can send you a spreadsheet that shows that.
Defining vacant units, because there's those numbers, if you're calling second home vacant units, that's saying we have 32%.
And that doesn't seem right. Yeah, I think we may have a, I'll clarify this here. In terms of size, you have small units. You don't have a lot of units that really actively accommodate families. So 16% contain 4 or more bedrooms. And your multifamily, both your condos, your multifamily are pretty small. So this is tough for large families if they're trying to be adequately housed. So the comment I made about building permit trends, and you're not keeping up after the recession. So this trend right here is really, really common in big urban markets, in communities like yours. Big bump in the 90s. Colorado grew a lot here. Baby boomers caused a lot of our growth, much more than what we see now. And so blame the baby boomers, I guess. So there's a lot of response to all of that growth. And then it continued until the Great Recession. You slowed down a little bit before, and you've had a harder time than most communities. You're getting there, but a harder time than most communities kind of picking that back. Thank you. We are seeing a little more multifamily action than we've seen in the past, but you're not unusual in that most communities we see a lot of multifamily or a lot of sort of alternative types of units in the 90s. That went away a lot in the 2000s. Preferences changed. The market accommodated those preferences. You're seeing a little more of a creativity in building, or at least permits. Yeah.
And this question might be for other people here too. The rail yard development, is that captured in?
Some of it would be. Yeah. But this is permits. This isn't construction. So
So really would definitely have been captured if it's just permits, because they were
that's probably what's going on here. Was it 21 before that?
Yeah. I mean, is this county? Is this county or city?
Oh, you know what?
Building permits are.
Hang on.
That's what I'm thinking. Yes, probably.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And there were a couple, more, this influx of individual bills that started happening for the most of those business subdivisions in that 2022 year. So you'd have some permits pulled for rail cars, Westwoods, but those are going to real subdivisions.
Were those the two biggest recently? Like,
and really the only two real subdivisions. Everything else has just been like infill,
kind of here and there,
and like standard stuff, and all of that in our slow recovery is building costs for this. We can't retain contractors.
And so is the end date of this the end of 2022 of this data?
Yeah.
So like any permits for 2023 and 2024 are
they're not captured there. Yeah. But I mean, on average, you're looking at about 39 per year. We'll talk about that in the context of your needs. And then we just separate the two here. So you can see the difference between Leadville and then. I'm going to shift and talk about affordability and needs. Your gross rent $1,554 in 2022. That requires an annual income of about 62,000. Median price of single family detached home purchase was 555, requiring an income of about 170. This jumped up to 790, much higher for homes that are relying on septic or than those connected to public sewer systems. But still, these prices are so it's really hard for households making less than 200,000 or 300,000 in some case to be able to afford it. Alternatives for affordable home ownership, I'm sort of stating the obvious, basically non-existent. You're just not seeing much attached or manufactured or homes that we typically see that are more affordable come available. There were 3 in 2023. And this is kind of curious. These homes in that case sold for more than 700,000. So anything that's coming on the market right now, sort of regardless of type of unit, is expensive. It is really, really hard to be able to find housing to become a homeowner right now. We also look at cost burden. I'll show you that in just a moment. We've been looking at shifts in cost burden by income. Across the board in Colorado, we're seeing people who, particularly renters, higher income renters, are becoming cost burden at levels that we've never seen before. Yeah.
Sorry. You have median you're using in there instead of average. Curious.
Why? Or, just because the median is less sensitive to low lows and high highs, so it's sort of capturing a more sort of a normal price point than an average would.
Because I would think if you're only looking at a 1-year period, it's the opposite. You know, if you had a few $1 million, then your median number is going to be much higher. I just know that, like, when we put out the average home price, it's not such.
Is it lower or higher?
Lower. It's
lower.
It's staying at 5.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that's why I'm saying, like, I just feel like that's a big difference.
Okay.
So maybe using, but I don't know.
Okay, we can take a look and see.
For rental data, I do think median is way more appropriate. I don't know about housing data, selling houses, but I mean, there's someone so well, absolutely 2,500. Inflate number and what it already is, and that would be not good. That would make this much worse. Not good.
Let me show you some of these graphics to demonstrate. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Price. When I reviewed the survey data itself, or the assessment itself, and I like that even though I know we traditionally consider mobile homes as affordable, the median mortgage rate for mobile homes plus the lot rent itself still averaged to about the exact same as the rent, right?
Yep.
So
yep. Or even a little bit higher.
Even in that situation, they aren't really affordable homes anymore. Is that right? And
correct.
they
yes.
tend to be more dilapidated in their infrastructure and everything. So right. So
yep.
want to highlight that.
Yeah, it's no longer an affordable alternative like it used to be.
Yeah.
I was just also curious about the price listed was 700,000, which I know they have sold for that in surrounding counties. But I don't believe that any big county houses sold.
It is true. Yeah, I put together the data. That is true. I can show you what those are. Yeah, it's just a couple that they did.
Yeah,
exactly.
The ones that are in the parks are still they're still expensive. They're in like 100 to 200.
Right. That you're selling the unit. Yeah, this would have been like a manufactured mobile home on land. Yep.
I don't know how the rest of the community feels, but I know for nonprofits when we're using this data, like being able to differentiate between those two.
Yeah, I mean, we can provide you with it's data that were given to us through the MLS, and then we combined with the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data to try and get a really good picture of what's going on. So this shows you shifts, and this is rent and utilities, shifts over time. This is self-reported data from the ACS. So this isn't from the survey that we took. We compare this with the survey. The reason that I'm showing this is because I can get trends out of the ACS that I can't in the survey. So, but we did look at current listings. The average asking rent was $1,450. That's our requiring the household income of $62,000. And this just shows you really the loss of affordability. You were pretty affordable in 2000 and still in 2010, although things were going up. But most of your rental units now are priced at 2,000 or more. Cost burden, I talked a little bit about the cost burden shifts, and what I'd like you to pay attention to here is this is rentals. I'm sorry. Yeah, rentals on the left, and then this is regular cost burden and severe cost burden. So regular cost burden is when I'm paying 30% or more. Severe is 50% or more. These are the people we really worry about because they're probably about to lose their housing. Most people who are extremely low income are severely cost burdened, but that was not the case in 2015, actually. Your rents were low enough that even low income people could avoid severe cost burden, and that's not the case anymore. If I'm not earning more than 35,000 and I'm a renter, you know, like sort of it's a pretty dismal situation. I'm going to have to pay a lot of my income in rent. But here for regular cost burden, we see this in every community that for lower, very low income people, they've always been highly cost burdened. We've never provided enough housing as a country for them. They continue to be highly cost burdened. We're not seeing much shift anywhere in which I'm working in cost burden there. But what we see is a really big jump for middle income renters, 35 to 75,000 people, and even your 75 to 100,000. Half of those renters are cost burden. That's a really high number. If you listen to what like cost burden starting to get picked up in sort of conventional statistics, a lot of times they combine renter and homeowner cost burden. You shouldn't because they have very different experiences with burden. But generally we see this, you know, I think statewide, it's maybe 40% of renters or 30% of renters who are cost burden. So being in the 75, 79, and 52 for your middle income renters, that's a heavy level of burden.
I wanted to highlight that even though year it's lower, significantly lower in 2015 for severely cost burden is for people making 20,000 or less, or 35,000 or less, there still was a fair amount of people. I mean, more than half of people making less severely cost burden, and that also kind of ties into the data that showed that there was displacement in our community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think if take that a step further, I could say this is a precursor for signaling to me that trend's going to continue. It's not a precursor, it's a signal. What do you call it? That yes. So let's look at home ownership attainability. This shows you here the shift. This is sort of like a distribution, so a histogram by price point showing the shift 2018 to 2022. So just a 5-year span there of this is the distribution of units by how they are priced. And you see most of your units here in the 600 to 800 and the 450 to 600. Got a few very, very high priced ones. You didn't really have anything $1 million or more until pretty recently. We also took a look because this came up in the early discussion that we did in January about FHA limits and them not being comparable to where your housing prices are. And so we looked at the FHA limits and the proportion, the share of homes that were priced or sold under those limits. It was less than 25% in 2022, but it was 43% in 2020. So that just shows you those limits aren't keeping up with your market. I'm going to jump to housing needs, and then I'm going to talk about stakeholder input, resident input through the survey, and then recommendations. So I want you to think hard about these and take a look when you're reviewing the study. Take a look at this. The projections of needs has become a big issue as recently as communities apply to get Prop 123 dollars. And my understanding is that the Division of Housing has been really, really scrutinizing these projections to qualify communities, particularly rural resort communities, to get any exemptions to be able to target 123, the money that's available to these higher income categories. So thinking back to your cost burden and where I showed your shifts in cost burden getting much higher for middle income, there's certainly a need for you there. What we did is we take, I've got a typo in households there, I'm sorry. We take the survey, we take market data, we take what we're seeing in demographic trends And then I segment them by the types of needs. So that segmentation includes residents who are reporting homelessness. Those are people who are reporting that they're in some state of homelessness in the survey. Doubled up households saved from the survey. Cost burden households. We look at what we're seeing in the survey, what we're seeing in ACS. New county workers. So this is a projection. You don't have a lot of job growth projected by the state demographer. So this is looking at that job growth. We also look at job growth. What I did is I looked at job growth for Summit and Eagle counties. I look at the share of their workforce that you all provide in terms of workers, and I multiplied that 3 times to try and understand how if they're not growing housing units and they're growing jobs, that reliance is probably going to increase here. So you're going to play more of a role as a bedroom community for those jobs, basically. And we did the same both for renters and for homeowners. For homeowners, I also projected repair needs. I'm sorry, for renters and homeowners, I also projected repair needs. And then based on what people told us in the survey, I looked at tax and utilities relief. So people who said, I'm cost burden, I'm having a really hard time paying my property taxes, we apply that to that share that we're getting in the survey to your total number of homeowners by a certain income bracket to get these numbers. So these numbers up here, they are these numbers, but they're categorized by AMI, and then this breaks it down by households. And I can let you study that. I'll talk a little bit about what that means for the future, but this is the graphic that I'd love you to really pay attention to. What I've done is I've taken all of these households here and then over 5 years said, this is what I think you could realistically do, given your pace. If you ramped it up a little more, given your planned development, these would be my goals for my trials. Yours mostly fall into that 60 to 80 to 100% range. So your middle income households. And that has to do with both households here who are struggling, but also where job growth is going to occur.
So is that projecting that we will only have 32 new jobs in the county in the next 5 years?
No, it's your job growth is 81. That's what their number is, but I combined households.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So 32 households.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But
81 jobs. Let me think through that a second. I'd have to look at the spreadsheet. I think it's 81 jobs. I'll double check that. It's not a lot. So most of where your demand is coming is from out commuter workers. So somebody said, yeah.
I know in the assessment it highlights pretty clearly that building all of these units is impossible and that there's other solutions. Is that still the same thought process behind this section? Or was that just in the overall recommendation?
I honestly think that you have so I'll back up and say the emphasis on what we're advising you to do is on the word strive, just sort of recognizing if you're a small place, you have limited capacity. When I compare what I'm told in terms of planned developments, so like the potential, and I don't really, and sort of what might be realistic over 5 years, if everything that you tell me in terms of your planning department tell me gets built, and a good share of those units are available to middle income people, you will be okay. Like you have land, you have the ability to accommodate your needs, particularly if you built out a community, community housing like we've seen in Summit County. That makes a big difference in addressing needs. Breckenridge is probably the best example of that. You can do it. Like you've got the land, you've got the ability to do it, you've got some proposals. Whether or not those proposals actually come to fruition is the big question, right? And so what we try to do is just say, this is what we think is possible if you reach and if you stretch, but you should absolutely do more if you can. And if there's money that comes available, let's say that you're really vying for those Prop $1, $2, $3, some money comes in the door, then do more than what I'm telling you. But this is sort of my realistic
So
expectation.
would that be, the expectation, so it sounds like the expectation is purely from the build perspective, does that take into account any programs like, by, down payment assistance program that turns a home into a rental or set AMI percentage, like, is that part of this calculation or is it purely just from like a literal physical development?
These are units on the, these are new units. I don't, I think those other programs and like what some counties worked with, the housing helps program, I think they've been moderately successful. Your inventory is so limited that I'm just skeptical that if I were to put my effort into anything and I could choose one thing to do, I'd try and get units built. I think that's what you need more than anything else. You also need rehab. I mean, you've got some condition issues too. Go ahead,
Yeah,
one too.
yeah. I was gonna say rehab, and I think we're also unique in that there is a demographic or generation that is disappearing over
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
generational
Mhm.
families, generations of families being here and households and people aging out or leaving or having multiple homes. So I do think we are really making an opportunity to into that housing if the multi-restriction to look
Yeah.
like that who got a house.
Yep.
Climates.
You should, I'm not saying don't try that. You should absolutely try that. And that's worked better than I would have expected. It did in some county. I mean, they've returned some numbers, some pretty good numbers with those deed restrictions. It's just not as much of a sure thing, a sure prospect as if I can actually get things built. And I know there's a lot of risk with getting things built, particularly here. The one thing that I just want to acknowledge is that so a couple things that are super unique about your market and just sort of the market in general. There's the cycle of the sort of the housing market cycle and sort of the progression of people getting older, downsizing, middle income people moving into those homes. It's sort of broken right now. Like it's not happening like it used to, and it's not happening because people are holding on to units, especially in a market like this, to give to their kiddos. People are, having 2 and 3 homes used to be a real anomaly. It's not so much anymore. So people have a lot of properties that they're renting. The technology that's paired to create, that's created the ability to really easily rent your unit, both as a vacation property, it is an active short-term rental, has really blown up. So there's a lot of different things I can do with my unit now. I would have sold it before if I didn't want to stay. It just was, I would have sold it and downsized or moved. I don't have to do that anymore. And so it's really disrupted the natural cycle that we've seen in terms of people getting older, selling, downsizing, and sort of releasing their home to that next generation. It's not happening as much as we think. But I don't want to give up hope. And I do think if I can move people who are high income renters into ownership, it's deed restricted ownership, I would argue that's fine too. You see a lot of support for that in the survey data. Then I'm going to free up some existing rentals. I just have to be smart about it. I have to be careful.
One thing I will say on that is because I've spent a lot of time on the state market for, she's an economist or she had an economic development background. And it's like, in terms of population change projection for Lake County, they're saying that the largest 2 projected changes are 56% increase in 75 to 85 and 33% increase to 85 plus. And the next largest increase is that 25 to 44. And that 0-17 is small, it's 12%. So in terms of the natural cycles, we're just gaining a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, people are aging. People love to stay in age and they like to age in place. Yeah, and so you're not getting that sort of second phase, right? You've got young workforce and you've got people who are aging in place, and you're literally that middle is not there.
So it's like you have the transient young, and then you have the old staying in place. That's how we built the engine in the middle.
Yeah, and the big question is with the older staying in place, will they stay in place? Will they be able to age here? And what do they do with their units? And that's people like to age in place. It's really hard for folks to downsize unless they're rich, and they still don't always do that. And so I'm always skeptical that that's a solution, that freeing up is a solution. I wouldn't hang my hat on that. So these are our numbers in terms of rental units. I think there's demand for a 30 to 80% AMI, 160 there, and then another 80 at higher levels of AMI. And then I think for homeownership units, I think you're going to be confident that you have at least 260 new homes in the 60 to 140 AMI. This is coming. So what I do is we take the preferences that are expressed in the survey data. We look at what those income levels are of those people. We fit them into your AMI category. I'm not pre-qualifying these people. I don't know what their credit is. I don't know if they can buy. So this is based on their income levels and their strongly expressed interests. For somebody at 60% AMI, they're more likely to make the trade-off and buy a deed-restricted product and not have that equity gain, but just say, I want to own a home in Leadville or Lake County. We saw that in the data. They're much more likely to say, yeah, I'd take a deed-restricted product, even if I couldn't get an equity gain. Less so for folks up here. These people still want to try out the free market.
So, I mean, I think that it is important to highlight specifically that your highlighting survey kind of supports that higher income folks would be less open to the idea of deed restriction homes. Therefore, you know, our target audience for deed restriction would be lower income folks, whereas for people making like that 140, what would you say the range is? 100 to 140, 120 to 140?
Well, I can show you that in just a second. I think I've got it in the slide. Yeah, if not, I can look it up.
Deed restriction option is not having anything.
What? Sorry.
Not tying the deed restriction to income.
Yeah, you can do that. You can do the work.
Doing a deed restriction that's tied to primary residence. I think that your audience is not likely to make the same thing.
So then we still can earn you can earn equity within a local market. It's not the same type of equity as in the whole.
Yeah, and I think it's super beneficial to our community to do that because we end up sprinkling these homes throughout town that people they can be the CEO of CMC. Whoever you can sell the house to, as long as it's their primary residence, you can ask what you want, right? But your price is always going to be buffered by whoever your audience is. And so we have a thriving community. You don't want to, because I see income deed restrictions in other communities do end up cutting out the middle because of the income restrictions. People don't opt for the raise, they don't opt for the second job, they don't do anything, and because they're tapped into the space. And so offering two different versions where you have some that are just deed restricted to primary residence opens up the possibility that we're not deciding what you're going to make to live there, but we're going to decide what we want that house to be occupied either by a tenant or a homeowner that's primary residence.
So we're going to sort of do a free market, the fully open market, the primary resident market, and then the income restricted market.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but in our meeting, the guy listed the regional housing authority, we actually had that discussion of income and whether or not we would force someone to sell the unit or move out if they gave above the AMI initial requirement. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just reading the room at that moment, but I felt pretty strongly that we kind of were all in favor of upward mobility being okay, right?
That's my personal view. I know that.
It just gets hard to manage, right? I mean, it's totally an ideal situation that there's always people choosing that system. You know, like saying they're making the same time to get into it. You know, so there's just harder to manage.
Yeah, and I totally agree with all these. I mean, the benefit that you have is you've got surrounding communities that have done this, particularly, you know, Summit's probably your best example. And I would interview the people who have dealt with programs, looked at the different structures, and just figured out where did things go wrong. Boulder, when they rolled out their first inclusionary, I think it was an inclusionary program, they didn't have an income restriction or a resident restriction, and so investors bought them and flipped them, and it was like one of these like, oh, you know, we sort of seen that coming. So you can definitely learn from the surrounding communities and communities who have done this for a much longer time. Pitkin County's got a long record of this too, and just see what's right for our community? How do we tailor this in a way that makes sense?
I do think it's important to flag somehow, though, that I think the way I read mentioning a restriction or deed, well, I don't know how many references we were to restrictions, but it was like assuming that there was a cap. And I think that like the menu, what we just talked about, really flexibility, what forward.
Yeah, like having some diversity. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It changes the tone in the conversation if you're assuming that there's that profit cap or there's.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways to structure it. Some of that's dictated by the funding that's in it. But it's really, if it's your funding, if it's flexible funding, that you can figure it out. And I haven't talked much because it's a new product concept about the Prop 123 has like a rent to own, like a lease to own program. That's a new concept. People aren't really trying that out yet, but there's definitely money available for that. So the goal here is to provide you with some numbers to work towards, some realistic numbers. If you can do more, then absolutely do more. There's demand for that. But to try and help you understand, okay, as we move forward, here's our goal with AMIs. These are the types of funds that we should actively pursue. But we need to tailor those solutions for our community, which it sounds like you're already having these discussions.
So, you brought up rent to home. It's interesting. I've only ever known it in the mobile home section.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a common, albeit very predatory practice in Colorado for years and years in the mobile market. Is that I didn't know that there was that like potential funding mechanism section for homeowning. Is that like a relatively new thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the funders that put together the foundation that put together conceived of Prop 123. That was something they looked across the country to try and figure out what is this sort of solution to be able to get low-income families into some type of ownership. So whether that be like a rent-to-own concept or a land trust is the other product, which functions a bit like a mobile home community, right? But you can't engage in predatory fashion to raise the price of the land. So there are definitely ways you can structure it where it works really well. Santa Fe, New Mexico has a very large land trust and large and successful land trust community. It's a giant neighborhood. And so there's certainly models that are out there, and there's funding now that can help you get there.
That's interesting.
Yep. So I just want to talk about, sort of how do you meet those 5-year housing needs? And this is my assessment of and I know that what I say is easy, it's easier said than done. And so I put together a couple bullets thinking, well, if I were in your shoes, this is what I would work toward. I do feel like you need to start integrating more affordable homeownership and rental units as the rail yards builds out. It's a big project. Love the idea of the 24 units home ownership. I provided Jackie with some early returns of survey data to help inform that. I think that you're on the right track with that. The proposed motel redevelopment that we understand could bring 40 to 45 affordable rentals. Definitely do that if you can. You need affordable rental units, and everything else that we're seeing is sort of a maybe, at least as far as we understand what's projected or what developers are telling you all. But that changes really fast. I recognize that. I would actively pursue creation of a mixed income community. Wellington's the one that's the most, it was sort of the early one in Summit County. They've since done another one that's by their Whole Foods called Base Camp. And then Smith Ranch is the one in Silverthorne that's being built out right now. These are really successful. People like them. Your survey definitely demonstrated interest in this. The one thing I would say that we've learned from the work that we did in Summit County with Smith Ranch. So Smith Ranch, if you're familiar with Silverthorne, is kind of down. If you're driving towards Steamboat, it's up on the hill a little bit. The Hispanic community whom we did focus groups with, we did 2 of those at Dillon Valley Elementary School. And we talked to them about Smith Ranch and said, did you look? Are you interested in this concept? And impression of it was that it didn't feel like it was for us. And particularly people who came who were to inquire about the units who were monolingual Spanish speakers, there wasn't a Spanish speaker or anybody who offered any kind of interpretation at the sales office, and the materials were not in Spanish. So that's definitely a lesson learned. You need to make sure this mixed income community is truly a mixed, a community that is saying welcome to everybody, and that requires a bit of hard work. But I would definitely keep that in mind. I don't think that in the past we as a sector have always thought about it. And then last but not least, much like most of our rural resort communities, you've got people who are couch surfing, who are homeless, who you may see, you can tell that they're homeless. They're, in your sort of studio motels, they're sleeping on the street sometimes, they're in their RV, they're in their car, they're sleeping in a church parking lot, very transient in general. But these people, we pick them up in the survey, they definitely need housing. Some of them are people who don't need services if they were in housing, and some do. This is a population that the country has significantly and severely underserved over time. We're starting to figure that out, but these are hard. These require deep subsidies. So to build a development that has some permanent supportive housing to it requires a lot of money, but it's easier to do now than it's ever been. But I also think you have this middle income rental need as well, basically based on the cost of the data. And so I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about the survey and stakeholder consultation findings. This informed everything that I showed you, but I want to give it proper attention. So we ask, and some of this is a mix of survey as well as what we're hearing from stakeholders. 36% of residents are happy with their housing situation. That is quite low. In most communities in which I work, it's much higher. So people are struggling and they're having a hard time. About a third said finding a home they could afford to buy would improve their situation. And then 25% of the Hispanic residents who responded to the survey said they need help getting a mortgage. When we asked people about the primary housing challenges, 20% or 19% said they've had to move in the last 5 years when they didn't want to. That's how we asked displacement. It was highest for young adults and low earners. We also asked how long, did your landlord give you, your property owner give you notice? How much far in advance did they give you notice about termination of your lease? And yours was pretty good. Sometimes we see like 1 week or, 2 weeks, but this was adequate. I remember it being like 1 to 2 months. Poor housing condition and rapport needs. About a fourth of people said their homes are in poor or fair condition. I think that the general belief here is that your units are old and are in poor condition. This 26% is about what I see in like an urban area. So it's not completely unusual. It's a little unusual for a wealthier community. Seniors said they have the most needs for repairs. When we also asked what repairs are needed, weatherization across the board was the most common. People say they want to buy a home, and then 32% of young adults said we need help with rental assistance.
I have a question about the termination of lease.
Yes.
A large community that does not have leases and rent. Is that?
Yeah, we separated out those two. I'll show you that in just a second. I think I've got a graphic on that. I think this is no surprise. So, and these are the data that you were looking at in terms of the home mortgage plus my lot rent makes my rent over the average rent what we see in the community. And Hispanic residents are your predominant occupants of mobile home communities. Just an observation, and this is true in many markets, your median rent is $1,450, and your median mortgage payment, this is self-reported, is $1,700. So if I, back in the day when I could buy a home for a reasonable price, I'm in pretty good shape. It's really hard for renters right now to pay this rent and save up for down payment assistance. Other household costs are high, so your utilities are pretty expensive. It was interesting. I think it's because you don't have a lot of these HOAs or condos that sort of resort style type condos. Your condo fees are pretty low. I'm trying to remember. I want to say like under 200, and like in Keystone, for example, that would be 800 to 900. So that's a good thing. We also asked if we have a question, and we think this is a neat question for advocacy. For political reasons, we asked if housing costs less, what would you do? And this is really sort of getting at that criticism of why would we subsidize housing? People just need to work harder. They would just go on vacations, they would buy a car. But in your case, people said I'd save, I'd pay off debt, and I'd make the repairs to my homes. The repairs is unusual. Usually I see these two, and then I do say, so a lot of times people say I give more to my kids or I'd go on vacation, but make needed repairs was unusual response to that question. So then we asked people about solutions. Do you want to move from Lake County? Most people said, no, I want to stay here. I'd really like to buy my house I'm living in or buy a home. When we ask about preferences, strong preference to 2 to 3 bedrooms, small single family detached homes or duplexes, fourplexes, people still want to live in a single family detached home. Very, very prevalent. It's very much in our DNA as Americans to want a single family detached home, but people will make that trade-off if they need to. This is the deed restricted response that I was talking about. 47% of respondents overall, so they would be very interested. 44 somewhat interested in buying a deed restricted home. And we asked that question if that's the only way you can attain home ownership. Those are high percentages. Those are high numbers. And I've actually got, I think, a graphic. I said I had this in by income, but I can pull that out of the report too if I don't have it in here. And then we asked stakeholders, what would you prioritize if you were in charge? And they said development of workforce housing communities, mix of deed restricted and wealth building, just like we talked about. Inclusionary zoning came up for private development. And then some kind of incentives, like we started to entertain too, to convert second and vacation rentals into long-term rentals. So that's the Housing Helps program I gave as an example. This just gives you a little bit of detail on who we captured in the rental survey. The rental survey, the residence survey. We got about 439 respondents. That's a really good number. We didn't do a statistically significant survey. Those are super expensive. But 400 is like the magic number in the statistical significance survey world. So when we feel like when we get to that number and we can kind of match your demographics, we're doing a really good job. We had 100 people of Hispanic descent who were represented. That's a very high number. Generally, people are pretty reluctant, Hispanic communities are pretty reluctant to take surveys. We have couples with children. We have adults living alone. People said I'm living in other arrangements. Couples, no children. So good diversity there. Good mix of homeowners. We have renters with lease, and we also have renters without a lease. So we did ask questions of them. And this is kind of curious to me. By household income, most of our people were higher income individuals. By higher, I mean 75,000 and more. So take that into account when you're thinking like kind of the data that I just showed you and sort of especially like this very interested and sort of where people are struggling. That's not coming from your lowest income residents. That's coming from moderate income people as well. Here is just the profile of the employment industries in which people work and the differentiation between your non-Hispanic white and your Hispanic community. This came up when we were doing the kickoff, and there was some active discussion around preferences and local preferences and whether or not those would work for people. Just an acknowledgement, local employment preferences. Your Hispanic community commonly commutes out to go to construction jobs. So if you had a local work preference, that would have a disproportionate impact, at least based on the survey on those individuals. So be careful of that. People talked about that. We certainly see it in the survey. Other places where we see differentiation is that you see sort of outdoor recreation outfitters tend to be more jobs that are occupied by non-Hispanic white individuals. And then in addition to that, education, there's a little bit of a difference there as well as locally here. Mining industries. So we also look at who is more likely to rent. Your renters tend to be those people who work in accommodation, food services. Manufacturing tends to rent, retail and transportation. Workers are more likely to be precariously housed if they have the following jobs: retail, construction, and manufacturing. By precariously housed, I mean I'm living in a camper, I'm living with my buddy, I'm sleeping on the couch, I'm living wherever I can. I'm in temporary housing and like a short-term rental that I gotta get out.
I do have a question about that. So I'm assuming that also in the variously housed folks, the type of folks who work at Ski Cooper, they potentially tend to be younger folks.
Mhm.
They're choosing to live in the parking lot of Ski
Yeah.
Cooper because they only plan to be here for that ski season and they
Mhm.
plan to move on. But if there was an employee housing option, that could potentially change that dynamic.
Yeah, I would say that. I got kind of deep into that with Silverton. I did a little study for them a couple years ago. And they actually had a campground that they had like a parcel of land that was a campground, I think, or campground-ish. And one of our recommendations was to turn that into sort of more like almost a yurt community to support Silverton Mountain because they had lost like almost all their housing for the workers. So that's something to think about because yeah, it is a transient. It can be very transient population, not always. One of the things that we heard when we did the work in Summit County, and I'm just giving you some reference points for that because it's fresh, is that the Hispanic community oftentimes was living in housing that was provided by Vail Resorts, but felt like they were being watched. So they were reluctant, less comfortable. They weren't the sort of lifty, temporary, yeah, I'll just live in a dorm style housing and it's okay for a little while. They felt like the housing that the resorts offered them was really not consistent with their family type. But also that they just felt a little more watched, like they felt like it was not a comfortable space for them. So just something to think about.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You highlighted some of the following jobs, so retail, construction, manufacturing. The survey itself, in section 4 under workforce needs and employment impact. You also highlighted that high turnover, turnover in service industry jobs is attributed to low wages, unsafe living conditions, and unreliable income. Is that the same market that you're looking at this?
Yeah, I would say that's more sort of a general state. This is actually coming out of the survey, but that would be more of a general statement of we see this in a lot of communities. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think we asked people, why did you leave your job?
So that this came, it was noted under the stakeholder section.
Oh, okay. Yep. That would have come from stakeholder comments.
Okay,
yeah.
So that would be somewhat attributed to the same survey data, or that was more pointed?
No, that would be what people sort of in the community are telling us they think is going on. But so this second bullet here would be a crosstab between the workers who are identifying as precariously housed, and then they also told us what jobs they worked in, and so then we matched those up. But we didn't ask why. We asked reasons for leaving their home for displacement, but not for leaving jobs.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm curious. I was curious 3 times or longer for people who work in banking, finance, and insurance. So these people are commuting to other counties to take high-ish paying jobs, and coming back here. But these are also people who own here, so they probably can't buy in Summit, can't buy in Eagle, and they have chosen to buy here, and then they're commuting out. And the people who are in construction, that's not a surprise. That's definitely a very fluid job, and also healthcare. And then the shortest commutes for workers are real estate, property management, 90% commute less than 20 minutes, manufacturing, and then nonprofit. So people have a little more flexibility in schedule for 2 of those. So this just gives you a sense of sort of what our profile is, who we captured. And one of the things we look at is a differentiation between white, Hispanic, and what we're calling other minority in terms of if I don't have a lease. There's not a lot of them. Only 4 people said I'm classifying myself as other minority. They were more likely than our other categories here to be renting without a lease. I was surprised that and our numbers are small here, but that you didn't have a larger number of people who are identifying as Hispanic descent saying they're renting without a lease. I think that's probably bigger than what we're capturing here, but it's something to note. We do have people of Hispanic descent saying they're more likely to be precariously housed, and they're far likely to rent and not to own. Forward here. In terms of the types of units that are represented here, we don't have a lot of attached or ADUs, but the people who live in those tend to be predominantly white. And multifamily are more likely to be occupied by other minority, but you're really a single family detached community. So this isn't as sort of impactful as what we might see. We also asked how people found their current housing, and I think this question is really interesting. Your Hispanic residents are way more likely than non-Hispanic residents, both to live in mobile home communities, but also to say they found their house through word of mouth. So you see here, family member knew of a place. That's the top reason how your Hispanic residents find housing. This is experience with displacement. This shows you the renter with a lease and renter without the lease differentiation here. Not as high as I thought it would be, but I think our renters without a lease number are lower. Precariously housed, not a surprise. Not as much variation in race and ethnicity as I would expect. In fact, your Hispanic residents are less likely to say they have been displaced. That could be because they're living in mobile home communities. They own their unit. They are kind of slightly more stability. It also could be associated with a stigma. I'm embarrassed to say that I had to move. I'm embarrassed to say that I was kicked out. And so I'm not going to report that in the survey, and we see that sometimes.
Also, they were displaced already.
Yeah, absolutely. You do see, I'm going to draw some sort of cultural delineations here. But we typically do see, if you look at homeless data, for example, particularly in urban areas, Hispanic population is least likely to experience homelessness than some of the other minority populations, except for Asian. But oftentimes, their homeless rate is lower than what you'd see in non-Hispanic white, and it's because families and friends tend to take people in more actively in that population.
That still reflects in our community with the doubled up data.
Double up data, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I'm not saying that that's that right. The doubling up is okay, but it's a solution that we see. I talked about this already when we asked people what are the top needs that you have: repair needs, weatherization, my roof is old, and then further down here, interior walls, heating system, sidewalk, broken and cracked windows, and ventilation. This is median monthly costs. And so this shows you here like everything that people say that they're paying. We have all Leadville and other part of Lake County, excuse me. This is renters here, owners here. I thought what was interesting was the other debt. So we have student loans, credit cards is quite high. So people really are, relying on debt to be able to make ends meet. That's a big chunk of money there. We also have captured childcare, transportation costs. You can really see how these are all adding up and making housing costs be really, really high. For your renter, for example, a renter in Leadville, their total costs or the living costs are over $3,000, even higher than that, almost $3,500 for other parts of Lake County. Owners higher costs, and that's mostly associated with it's like it would be the cost of child care, so they're probably more actively participating in child care. This is our if housing costs less, what would you do with the money? And I would use this if I were you to look at what we could do, look what our community wants and what they would do if we actually had affordable housing. So I think this is a really nice marketing piece to be able to get funding. But what you see here is general savings pretty much across the board. Some pay off my debt, reduce my debt. What you saw was a really, really big part of monthly housing costs. Down payment to buy a home is more common for renters without a lease as well as renters with a lease. And then we asked them about their solutions. I talked about this a little bit. I want to buy. Owners and seniors need help with repairs as well as property taxes and utilities. And then young and low-income people need assistance. We also asked preferred housing types. I talked a little bit about this as well. 2 to 3 bedroom detached. I am less willing to occupy a single family home where the owner lives. So this told me a little bit about sort of the ADUs as maybe not being as big of a solution as you might see in other markets. I'm less comfortable with that in this community, and then the interest. That's all I got. So I'm happy to take, I ignored the Zoom people and I'm sorry. I'm happy to take questions let's take questions from them first. You didn't pop up, you went away on my screen so I could present.
I don't see any hands.
You don't? Okay.
And Zoom folks, if you have a question, you can just go ahead and come off Zoom. Come off mute.
I have a question. For the employment data, did that that does capture the out of county, like what fields people are working in, that does include out of county?
Yes.
Thank you.
The survey, so that, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that quite that quickly. There are two parts of the study that have employment data. When I was just speaking about the survey data, and we were having a conversation about some of that, that would be jobs that jobs people are working, that residents here are working, regardless of where those jobs are. Early on, when I talked about sort of out commuting and the jobs that people are out commuting to, those would be out of the county jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's getting like ahead of it, but I'm curious, is it possible? So there's that slide of like, you know, rough numbers, but you know, like 200 units and renting at this AMI.
Yeah.
Could you start doing the math of what? Yeah, thank you. So could you start doing the math of like, make an assumption of like what size rental unit, like say those 160 units are, and like what the gap is between not being housing cost burdened, like what people can afford, and what the market cost of that unit is.
You mean cost in terms of like construction, or yeah?
Use what they're selling on the market for renting as a proxy for that, where you could do your own math on like $300 a square foot, not revert with costs. But like I get, for me, I like one lens is like, okay, let's do it.
But you're wanting to know, like, what does this really mean in terms of cost?
It's with an average gap between not being housing burden and market rate of 200K. 200K is 500 units.
It's a lot of money. Yeah.
A lot of money. And that subsidy has to come from somewhere. So I don't know, like, it would be great to like, in my opinion, it'd be great to just like do that in reality. Board has no.
We've already done it. Thank you.
Yeah, can you share?
Yeah.
Well, I just have a spreadsheet that I made for Jackie earlier of like what affordable would be for monthly rents.
Yeah.
At each of those AMIs. So I think that's, I mean, I think the variable that's missing is like house size. But
right, so you need to make some assumptions.
Yeah.
You want to take the average market sales price. You want those things.
And that's covered in the AMI as well. Like the AMI grants does cover a lot of like what numbers for. I think the question more is what does that mean in terms of subsidy?
Yeah.
As how much we're subsidizing to get that affordability. I was talking to Mayor about this. That seems like an internal question for us at the like county, city, and regional housing authority.
Yeah.
Really plan this out and be intentional about it, like understanding what the need is from what AMI is, what potential, collaboration opportunities we have to bring in new funds. What are some of the programs that we can implement that might address some of this, and then like come up with a plan.
Yeah.
So I would love if there is any input that Root Policy could have on that. I would love to have that as well to maybe ease some of that mathematical work on that.
Yeah, I mean, we typically what I would do if I were you is you will have a requirement with the House Bill 174, House Bill, Senate Bill, I don't know, whoever brought that forward, the new bill 174 to do what are they calling it? A housing action plan, I think is what they've framed it, by the end of 2026, maybe. I might be getting my dates wrong, but I do think that DOLA has funding for that. And so, and there's some requirements about what's in that I think they put forth in that bill. I would look at doing, so typically we'll do a housing needs assessment and then a community, and this is how it's working in Colorado right now, would then do a housing strategy or follow with a strategy. And I think that's how that bill is crafted, is that that's what it envisions. So I would definitely seek funding to be able to do that if you want to get to that sort of, really nitty gritty in terms of financial analysis, and also try and match funds if you need help doing that. And there's a lot of people out there who can do that.
And we did already for the housing, so the housing needs assessment done in 2018.
Yes.
Was done, followed up with housing action plan.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Willow did that. Yes. Yeah.
So we have a history of doing that. Just really doing that again. I'd love to start working towards that process, acknowledging that it's probably going to be a 2025 goal.
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing
I'm curious about is like, does our demographics, like the demographics that I really read in here was that families with kids, kind of representing that middle chunk, are on the decline, but people living alone or folks without kids, especially renters, that represents the growth or sort of the lion's share of our demographics in terms of.
I think that's because you're not supplying the market with units that families would occupy. I think you could change this. Yeah. I mean, I think
that we could create the supply.
I think so.
I mean, there, but we just don't have any supply.
Yeah, I mean, people may feel differently, but I do feel like that's part of the issue, is that you haven't been able to support.
Another piece that I think when we're thinking about how many units need to be built are that I think with the new, I think that the intention is always for the greater returns, but I think the result of the new tenant protection rules, especially in the state of Colorado, are going to take away a lot of your individual landlords.
Oh, like your small mom and pop.
Yeah, you're just a regular person who's renting out their house. So convincing your second homeowner to long-term rent is going to be harder to do than ever, just because the risks are so much higher now. It's really, really hard to remove a tenant even if they're not paying rent now. And so we can afford to pay a mortgage for 3 months while we're trying to get rid of the tenant. So those kinds of things, we're going to start to see some of those individual rentals, which are probably the majority of them right now, you're going to start to see this get removed from our market as well.
I believe those. Yeah. One sort of an interesting solution that I like that's from Austin, Texas, is they have a program called Affordability Unlocked. And it's an infill program, and they have a by right allowance for I think it goes to 8 plexes on single family detached lots under certain conditions. Like it has to be a corner lot or of a certain size. But if you if you build units on that lot, or you're allowed to demolish a single family detached home and build an 8-plex, if 75% of the units are affordable, and they built those tenant protections. It's a nonprofit provider program, nonprofit development program, but they built the tenant protections into that. So they almost created, you kind of melded like zoning and land use, repurposing of units that weren't really in very good shape into attached housing. And they put the protections in that kind of a product as opposed to sort of like a mass application of those, to try and infuse some intentionality around those. So matching the affordable with those tenant protections.
Colorado's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it wouldn't work in that absence of that. It's sort of not as much of a, have that trade-off. I'll give you the zoning and land use flexibility if you promise me this.
Well, and like you said before, I mean, we're kind of unique in that we don't have a lot of multi-family. So the apartment complexes where you have a master property manager or owner of that complex to absorb or deal with those regulations. That just doesn't exist here. The majority of our rentals, we're relying on mom and pop rentals. And so that to me is a fear of we're going to lose.
Is that right? Do we have data on who's renting out units? I mean, as far as I know, the city of Northern County require.
You have a registry. Yeah, we wouldn't know on the ship.
No, but if you just think about like multi-family long rentals in town, there's not very many, right? You have Eagles Nest.
Right, and I also think about like Aspen Realty being one of the biggest property management
Yeah, but we don't own those houses.
Right.
So our owners have to come to us in this house, leases, if their tenant
Right.
doesn't pay, that's not, that's not us, that's the owner.
Right, yeah, they're
So-
absorbing the cost initially.
So that's what I'm saying, so those owners are already fully,
Right,
they're already taking their houses out. So management company doesn't affect that pool, it's an ownership, right? The ownership, if a big organization or an apartment complex, they're able to absorb the risks of those new tenant protection rules better than individual property owners, or not. Their risk is higher than a company that owns.
So the nature, renting a home as an individual homeowners. I mean, it makes sense. But yeah, it's,
Yeah.
regardless. The scarcity right now is. So, difference between the AMI and AMR is so disassociated. Than just building market.
Yeah, but I agree. I think that it'll, it's gonna be another hit to you all. Yeah. And there are programs where you can incentivize mom and pop, like through rehabilitation to keep their rents low. I don't know how widespread they are, or how successful they are. It would be interesting to pitch that to the state too and say, look, we're really afraid that we're gonna, come together as the resort. I don't know if it's any sort of coalitions have tried that, where could there be a program? Yeah, but could there be a program to help keep the mom and pa's renting, to incentivize them to rent? I do know of one in New Mexico. They looked at youth that were legal foster care system, and they have I think it's in some of the surveys that we've done too of property owners or landlords, is that they just want money. Like, you can give them like a subsidy to take certain types of high risk tenants, and New Mexico's had a lot of success with youth leaving the foster care system, and mom and pop landlords stepping up and taking those youth in. So it does work. I just don't know if it would work under this framework, but it feels like it's worth a try. It's worth a conversation. Yeah.
Just a curiosity, I know Leadville is very unique in their population. Is there any other region where you see this type of community and how their needs, like trying to access restricted properties?
Not that I've done. I'm trying to think.
Because that would be a huge population that we would
yeah.
basically leaving out, because we don't have a lot of future developments.
Yeah.
Like,
It's really
so that.
Right. What you're raising, is I think the core point here, which is it's really a policy call of how you want to continue to provide housing for our commuters. And I feel like they're such a big part of your community. They are your community, right? They're out commuting for jobs, just like you would in an urban area across city or county boundaries. But it is pretty unusual in your situation. Ridgeway's a little bit like that too. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I can't remember. I did a study there quite a while ago, but it wasn't this extensive. And I don't think they have a deep restricted community. Their numbers weren't as big as yours, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, because this is like, these are generations.
Yeah.
Families that have been living. They have never.
Yeah. The jobs are.
The projections indicate that that'll change.
Right.
It's going to continue.
Yeah.
And the very nature of that situation is we don't have tax space to solve that. People are going to work.
What else is so be true? I would love to see to what extent
I mean, outside of sales tax, to what extent, like the differential in that tax really does? Because I mean, they still pay the same property tax, same everything tax except for really sales tax. I mean, we don't have income tax in the county that we are. So I don't like to what extent are they really now benefiting?
That's what I meant to say is folks are going to work somewhere generating wealth that doesn't come back to our community to help support.
The business that they're working at is creating income for the community.
So it'd be nice if, I think that highlights the importance of like state level funding.
Well, absolutely. But the business that they're working at generates revenue for the business, not for the community usually, unless there's a sales tax or other such associated thing. But I guess my point more so is to say that like the rhetoric of they aren't providing the same benefit as local workers. I don't want to be careful around that because I don't think that there's as big of a difference as we like want to associate it with. As we tend to not necessarily just you personally, but just in general. I think the sentiment of like, and I think it was somewhat highlighted in the survey data, sentiment of like certain home ownership styles or certain people working in certain places benefiting the community differently. I think it's a very dangerous, especially highlighting who those people are community. Yeah, it's survey highlighting well Hispanic. I would be careful on the section as a group as a whole.
I mean,
That's okay.
it's really helpful. Me, like, there's two other lenses. One is in his comment is and my previous comment, like, what is this 5 year subsidy gap? What is the cost? Like, really improve like where that money come from and being realistic, like, and or current and projected tax base, city, county, other taxing districts will always support that. But where else did it come from? And then the second thread is like if you need for the next 5 years to try to have some much harder conversations without lawyers, but people who live here about chipping in.
Yeah, I mean, because of our big problem that we identify is that the majority of the people who are over the hill, I mean, that's the problem for here the second. And we continue to incur the costs of that situation. But we're not going to encourage that business growth here, you know, that fabrication shop to rotate in Leadville because there's more housing options for their workforce in Leadville. We're never going to make strides in that direction. And commercial property tax is a huge number. And so businesses who are paying commercial property tax in Summit County or Newell County, those communities, if they're having a housing issue for employees, and a lot of those employees are saying, I want to reside in Leadville, that's great. And you think there would be that conversation can happen to allow for there to be some assistance on creating that housing. But Lake County has tried to cover that burden for decades. And really,
have those conversations ever happened to your knowledge?
They have years and years ago. I think recently, and Jackie can correct me, I think recently there's been a little bit more openness to the idea of collaborative housing projects in Leadville, but I don't think it's gone very far. Years ago, when we tried to have those conversations, it was kind of like, we can't use our tax dollars to build housing in a different community. So that's been
and with employers, you haven't had that conversation with employers?
No, there have been some employers though. Like there was a guy who never happened, but he bought some land and was going to build a bunch of multifamily for his own employees. Okay. And we were gonna, try to work with him on that project to make sure that allowed for him to have affordable workforce housing for his.
But like Copper Mountain and Vail Resorts of the world are not coming to you and saying, let's have a conversation. Let's go 1 and then 2. Yeah.
I read a study recently, I can't recall where, that excessive workforce housing amidst housing scarcity is actually highly disruptive to the market. Has any of your research and
other communities.
Like overbuilding workforce housing? Is that
Well,
what you
like
mean, or-
Climax
Uh-huh.
Buying entire buildings for
Uh-huh.
their employees.
Yeah, employees.
That you see.
I'm not aware of anything, but I'd be curious to see. Do you remember where? And when? Okay, I would love to see that. Yeah.
I think that
I think it'd be.
disruptive because it means they're holding units vacant.
Right.
Yeah.
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 So I see what you're saying.
Oh, I understand what you're saying now. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Right now, Climax is increasing their work.
Uh-huh.
They're building work. So the Silver King project isn't really gonna help.
It's not going to help you because it's okay.
So it's not renters who are renting elsewhere who are in Silver King and open up rental.
I mean, the only thing it could alleviate, their workers living elsewhere.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's not. Oh, this one's not.
Bringing new workers to town.
I understand. Okay.
Could it eliminate new pressure though on the market?
We just
Yeah.
depend possibly. Yeah. Yeah. If they're going to bring them anyway. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think if you take away the scarcity issue in general, it's true.
Mhm.
But the study that said if you have housing scarcity,
Mhm.
and then it becomes a competitive thing of how safely is going to buy this house for their own.
Interesting. Mhm.
Anyway,
That's really fascinating. I mean, there aren't a lot of good models of employers. I think it's overly optimistic to think that employers are going to step up and they only provide housing if they really, really have to. I mean, there's some models of the HP doing that in California. But it just doesn't, I get asked about this all the time. And I just feel like I wouldn't really, gamble on that. I just don't think they step up unless they absolutely have to. But in that case, I've wondered about that in the context of some urban areas where you see rents continuing to go up, even though household growth isn't occurring, renter growth isn't occurring. And I think it's a lot of corporations master leasing. So I could see where that disruption could happen. But I'm not aware. I don't know the extent of it. I'm not aware of it. Yeah.
There are a percentage of the units that are reserved for.
Oh, interesting.
Which is a little bit different than Climax. Reserving just the nature of the master lease comment and the dynamic of that. And then also that I'm assuming the county will outlast the comments. So. TBD figures.
Hope so. What other comments, questions? And I know people haven't had a chance to make your way through it. I don't know, Jackie, what the best way is to. I think people are giving you comments through email or making comments in a PDF. So
yeah, I'm happy
that works well.
I'm happy to receive any comments and questions that you have in forth. I think that's
it's probably easiest. Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of totally missed this, but is there a way to frame these numbers? Like what percent increase are they? Because
we do have that in the report, actually. Yeah. Yeah. So we compare your annual construction. I can't remember if it's permitting or actually like construction with what these numbers would mean in terms of how much you need. So you mean? Yeah. Okay. Grandma.
This is kind of an awful question to ask, but like if your housing needs so we have the 10-year trend of like displacement.
Yes, I don't.
Did you extrapolate that displacement trend in these 5 years? Because where I'm going is like I off the top of my head, like do we have 3 years to fix this or 15 years to fix this? Like if how like absolutely like brought all the stops urgency is this or can we like chill out a tiny bit and fix this in 10 years?
Oh yeah, I mean I would say like the way that I think about it is so yes, I would say that the numbers do stem displacement up to a point through a couple of different ways that we're looking at it. I would, and this is a little bit of a different message, or maybe it'll sound naive compared to sort of how funding works in the state. But if I would actively pursue projects that meet these ranges, and if one walks in the door, go for it and get it funded. And don't worry, it's a conversation we're having with DOH a bit right now. Don't over worry about meeting this perfect distribution of people. And nobody wants to segregate anybody. You know, sprinkling throughout the town, the community is the best thing. But if you got a good project and it comes in, I would not over worry about those things. I would just try and get affordable housing in this county and in the city as fast as you possibly can.
Yeah.
It's really easy to shut things down because they don't meet an absolute ideal. And I feel like that's what's going on in the state right now. It's really odd. And so I would just be very cognizant of that.
I wanted to add to that, Jen. I think that was part of what I was trying to ask is like, is this amount, if this we need to build rental units 10 times faster than we have been?
It's not that much. It's not that much. No, but you're building units, but those units aren't going to people who live here. So that's your problem. I mean, that's where I feel like the planning industry just sort of missed the boat. Is that when you look at comprehensive plans with, oh, sorry, planners, I know you're a planner, but when you look at, and everybody, there are other planners here, when you look at comprehensive plans or master plans, they don't ever say, or even forecast, or the state demographers forecast, they don't separate units that are going to be used by investors or non-people from people. So we've just been thinking, we've been in this sort of naive state where we'll just put units out there and we'll just master plan and we'll, you know, project, and we're not separate. We're not really looking at who's occupying those. So I think that's where we kind of collectively in this state, and particularly in resort areas, just missed the boat. We just pretended a unit is created equally, and it's not.
I think it's bigger than that because we've also been focusing on single family houses rather than rental.
Oh yeah, I would agree. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And I think what compounds the issue is that we're not actually a resort community. Right. So that is the problem. Right. That we are intrinsically a veteran community.
You are, that supports resort communities.
And
yes.
therefore that compounds the issue because we don't, there's nothing even close to.
But you're acting more like, I would argue you're acting more like a resort community than you ever have. But your market's behaving more like a resort community.
Sure.
So
I wonder though if that's just like market pressure from the surrounding resort communities. You know, I don't necessarily. It's like I'm the tourism department. Like, you know, it's not like we're acting like Dale.
No, that's what I know. That's not what I mean. I mean, like your market is no, I'm not saying you're Vail, but like your market is becoming that. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like you're like having a Boulders market where like suddenly you're like the it kid. And so like, you know, it's hard to keep up with that because people are deciding, oh, maybe someone's not that great or Eagle's not that great. And so Leadville's better. And particularly if I'm coming from Denver, you know, which is where I live, like you're not that far of a drive. It's maybe harder if I'm flying in from out of state, but
I mean, maybe comparing my question there. Like what is that compared for housing stock? So like if you're looking at 240 units for rentals, like we have like 640 units.
A share of your overall stock. Yeah.
Like increasing our current stuff.
That's my train of thought. It's like if we're writing grants or appealing to partner other places outside of this community, like 160 rental units in Eagle or like is not a big deal.
It's a big deal here. Yeah.
But here it's a huge deal. So how can we frame this number that conveys to partners across the country that this is a very big deal?
Yeah.
Because I think like federal or state government in Denver look at 160 and be like, that's one building.
Yeah, but you should frame it that way when you go after grant funding. Absolutely. This is a really big boost. And look what we're doing and what we're trying to do.
Availability and cost of units is the support labor homelessness.
Yeah.
Which is the associated problem.
Yeah, right. Let's go here and then okay, go ahead.
A question more for local leaders here and RHA folks. Is there a plan to continue with Roots to continue to track the stuff, see how we're moving, or should that be done internally in the RHA? Or because this is great data and could give us some metrics, we can set goals and metrics, but who's gonna keep track?
We have a legal requirement to be a assessment.
That you are, I mean, I just want to say you're all very smart people, and you know, I mean, we could help you come up with a spreadsheet where you could track. Like, I don't feel like you need me to do that, to be honest, but I mean, just roll this over, think about this, ask questions about the numbers, see what they, you know, sort of socialize them, see if they feel right. And then we'll finalize this. We can put it in some kind of, I don't think it'd be hard to turn this into some kind of metric track. I wouldn't develop it, like some urban communities develop a dashboard. I wouldn't do that if I were you. I think that's necessary.
I think we also have, I mean, we have like pretty finite opportunities for private development, and then Harrison Avenue and TMC, and those are, I mean, those are numbers we can stick to,
start to
all of those. Yeah. Promotion, you know, I mean, there's like 3 developments in the wing, 2 on the schedule for like sketch planning and those kinds of things, and then using like CMC and Harrison, it's possible we build these numbers and like we don't necessarily, I mean, we don't need an action plan, but like we don't need to spend the time to planning being implemented.
You can do.
And we also kind of shift. Like, okay, here are the actual opportunities because they are finite and they are in front of us. They're happening now. And where do we do that? That's running with like new construction. How do we address preserving? And then also how do we address not making it harder for people to maintain their homes as they are, you know, new rules and regulations. I'm pretty worried about.
Yeah, I think it doesn't seem like a lot of work. It can definitely be in-house, but I think tracking that will be important. Be also important from a communication standpoint. Be able to tell we're like making some real progress.
And you should, I mean, you should make a big deal out of everything you're doing. Make a big deal. Tell the community this is what our need is, and look how we're going to fulfill it, and we're going to keep on working. I do want to say, in terms of this number relative to your current stock, I think I'm hearing from, in terms of sort of competitiveness to try and go after state funding, big numbers are better. So I do think being, you know, if you feel like this number is too small, like for what you're thinking about pursuing, you know, funding wise, this is sort of the way that I had a conversation I've had conversations with DOH and with the people who put together, who conceived of Prop 123 the last couple of weeks. And I'm trying to help them understand that housing needs assessments should be a realistic picture of what a community can do over 5 years. If I gave you, and I'm not reducing cost burden for every single person that was on that graphic. I'm telling you what I think is realistic, given what you've got in terms of money, your small community, your building season's really short. This is what I would be really happy about if I were you at the end of the day, but this doesn't represent the totality of your need. And so just to know that, I think they're getting that, but I think it's been a little bit of a learning curve for them.
And one thing about data, in terms of the utilities, did you by chance, I don't know, we got contacted for any utility that's us C4 got contacted for understanding the utility burden, or that we do have a lot of data in terms of people will apply for bill payment assistance, which is,
okay, yeah, we could definitely put that in there. Yeah.
My other thing was, I know you had mentioned this earlier, but in terms of inclusionary zoning, really just the idea that we need to stretch all our limbs, so to say, would you say that is a component of this as much as any other component, and you know, being important for us as a community to have?
If I had to choose between like creating an intentional workforce community and employing inclusionary, I would do the intentional workforce community first. I think inclusionary may work in your community because you've got a lot of volume coming online. We caution against inclusionary in communities where they're built out, where there's not a lot of known potential product. It just doesn't work very well. It doesn't return units, and it's hard to put into place. And there's a lot of resistance typically by the development community. It's a little hard to model right now because the the costs are so high and not a lot of, it's hard to make it work right now because interest rates are so high. But I wouldn't write it off. And I think Steamboat, if you can look at Steamboat as maybe a case study for, they had inclusionary pre-recession. They got really nervous about it during the recession because they couldn't sell anything. People couldn't sell anything there. And so they got rid of it. And then they had to do a lot of work to try and get it back. And so I think it's definitely a policy option, but I wouldn't, it's something that I would employ depending on the market context for sure. It may not work today. It's not to say, so we've got a lot of clients right now who are thinking about it. We're saying it may not work today. It might work in 2 years. It's probably going to work when the economy settles a little bit and interest rates go down. So I wouldn't abandon it entirely. Don't be Steamboat. And now they've gone sort of full bore and they've got all these products now and they've raised a bunch of money. So they're a little schizophrenic in how they've dealt with housing policy. I would look at it as, yeah, that should be something in our toolkit. We should think about it. Yeah.
Well, and we don't have the inclusionary zoning, but we do include the piece already. And so that it's not like inclusionary zoning. We either didn't have the administration for it or the programs to put towards it. And so when you do the payment in lieu, everything I've read is like, it actually costs $5 a square foot, but you can't impose that on the applicant. And so it ends up being $1.67.
Yeah.
So you can build it. We can't build anything for that.
Yeah.
We can't physically do it.
You're not, the fee and lieu is not
actually pay for it with that. So we ended up having code currently actually working out quite well as far as the percentages of what the conversations ultimately result in between the planning department and the applicants.
Okay.
And like 10-11% of developments being affordable housing. So
if it's working, don't disrupt it.
The affordable housing. Well, right now we have 140% AMI in a current application. So that's 140% or less.
Is that homeownership or is that a rental? Or are they both? Is 140 applicable?
That is a homeownership.
Homeownership. Okay.
But that is like that fluidity in the conversation, and it's not saying, well, you could do this or you could pay us.
Anywhere.
Also within the planned unit developments where there's that room for negotiation. And so that most recent development, they just got passed substantially. But they need to work with our housing authority to determine how those units will be.
Yeah, administration's it's a big deal. And when you're a small community, that can be a barrier. But it sounds like you're doing the right things. Absolutely.
What about light?
What about them? Like, should you get one? Yeah. I think if you could get a LIHTC, that would be nice.
We met with the developer. She uses LIHTC.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And she said we actually,
because
absolutely. Of the region we're in.
Oh, Chapelwood Award because you have it. Yeah, I think I would definitely do that. And you could talk to the planners in Summit and Breck had one that came online too. And the planner in the housing person, her name is Lena in now in Summit County, but she was in Silverthorne, but she did the Brown Ranch, not Brown Ranch, that's Steamboat, the Smith Ranch development. And so she could talk a lot about what worked and where they set their rents and how they leased up. So I would definitely, absolutely. If you could do a LIHTC, that would be wonderful.
To answer your point, affordability for 140% AMI for a 2-bedroom, it is $470,000. And for income wise, 40% AMI is $93,660 for an individual. It goes up to $107,000. And of course, it varies, but it does have a high jump to 120,000. So 2 new teachers in our community would be significantly below, like they would be closer to 100.
Well, and it's
the range, and that's the beauty of the process. Currently, at least it's producing like that conversation of dedicated to 140 or dedicated to the 200,000 less than market rate, which they also talk about. It's incorporating a lot of things through that, to like catch in the prelim. You really have to figure out like where
I just wish we were a little more targeted.
and
You can marry that with down payment assistance. I do think what the other problem in our state is our down payment assistance is not kept up with the market. It's too low in terms of what's offered, but I mean, there's that possibility too, to try and boost that.
So, to what extent does looking units up for community? I mean, I could say just purely off of what we're going with, it doesn't do anything, but developing units that really aren't for our community, aren't targeted range, really doesn't do anything with it.
Do you mean if your income, like the AMI is too high?
Yeah, like, let's just say that we continue the way that we are right now, and all these units that have been built since through 2022, and we're still in the situation we're in. Clearly, as you stated through the assessment, hasn't been that focus on the AMI. Would not just be better to save that land or potentially have some sort of safety net for us, which inclusionary zoning does serve as that, but so that the land doesn't get overutilized in a way that makes it inaccessible for the future, but also not for the people that we want it to be, meaning it continues to be sold in similar ways it's being sold now. Would that not be a strategy for, say, for example, we can't afford to develop these?
I mean, if you own the land and you can land bank, I think that's a good strategy. Yeah. It's what I would do is if I can build the units, I can figure out how to get the units that meet these affordabilities, that would be preference.
Right.
If I can't because construction costs are too high or I can't get the funding, I would try to land bank, absolutely, and save the land. I wouldn't say no necessarily to market rate development that permanent residents could occupy. Yeah. I mean, would you say no to, and can you say no to, I mean, there is there's some logic in allowing homes that are meant for second home owners and who are short-term rent to be built, because that pressure exists in your community and it will continue to exist. So I mean, I wouldn't say no to those either. Would you say?
They do pay property tax.
Yeah.
And they pay property taxes. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say no to that either, but all I'm saying is that, and you know, some people really bristle at like this idea of like a Wellington or a community. You want, you know, sort of integration, but truthfully, the way that, I mean, you're already seeing this in your development, that there are parcels that are set aside for gated communities, for, you know, luxury housing. Your community is already self-segregating, right? Because that's how it's how the private sector is doing things. So it feels to me like, why not have a community housing development? Like that's what you need. I mean, I think it's naive to say that some communities think through inclusionary, they'll get more sort of a perfect match of like scattered site housing, but that typically doesn't, unless it's very intentional. So,
but more so to the point of like, we do have developers that like totally have the option and ability to create these developments, like 1 or 2 or like 5%.
Oh, does that work?
Units actually go to the AMI target much less like local workers. It's just, or local people, period, or primary residencies. I fully agree and support the idea of mixed neighborhoods, segregated neighborhoods. I think that's the proper approach. But if the developers are offering is mix of nothing really, it's like, oh, these $1 million and then these $700,000, like that just, you know, doesn't really mean anything to me. In my opinion, we got 12 units out of the proposed 144. Like, you know, is that really a significant percentage to the point where we would have gave up such prime real estate?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I see.
Like, So I guess for me, it would suit us to be intentional and careful, of course, but with some of these policy decisions to make sure that we safeguard that land so where developers do come in, they can't take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's not a bad strategy. Absolutely. I mean, if the land's, I mean, that's a question of, is the land available? Is, you know, could we do this? Yeah.
Just ask about like soft strategies outside of housing, understanding everyone has to pay for being and food.
Yeah.
From the survey, these are big expenses
Yes,
to communities. Are there smaller projects that we should also be focusing on at the same time to keep people housed with rent, to make sure that we're paying 5% on?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like free up that funding otherwise.
I mean, rental, people love rental assistance and people need rental assistance. The problem is it's not as cheap as you might think, you know, in terms of like, and we've, I mean, I think COVID, what is that? Oh, that's great. I mean, you should then absolutely keep doing that. Don't, I mean, it's not as, if you provide rental assistance to everybody who needs, like if that was my only strategy and I wanted to try and reduce that cost burden for everybody, it becomes a really big number. But you should, sometimes you are, yeah, in a small market, absolutely. But everybody tells us they need the rental assistance. I mean, I think that COVID showed that it really stabilized people. We didn't deliver it very well as a country because we didn't know how, because we don't really do that, right? Except through the Section 8 voucher program, but it helped people. And across all our surveys, people say, yeah, rental assistance was great. I mean, it's a real bummer that's going away.
About it being expensive, because our need is so great, it seems expensive. In our program, it's the cheapest thing we do.
Oh, that's great.
And it's, the data shows that in terms of just a prevention strategy, it's the biggest bang for the buck in preventing homelessness.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you've studied it, you should keep doing it. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then the other highlight is the EREN, which is what Colorado uses for rental assistance, are extremely well utilized in our community compared to communities. We capitalize on it well over $1 million in just a year. Through Full Circle. I love the data for it, but our community has historically, including through landlords, which typically aren't most open to it, but now it's people get open to it. They are. Our community has been successful being able to negotiate that.
That's great. Yeah. I just meant by being expensive that you there needs to be so much more than there is, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that it's slower during that time.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't really know how the market's. I mean, it's a good question. Does it just if you have enough units, if you have a competitive market, then it's about, you know, then it'll work. But
so I mean, the market, the reason we need this safety net is just because houses are empty because people get kicked out.
Yeah.
Or you can't charge them. So that's what I mean. The problem.
I mean, a good LIHTC can do that. You know, I mean, I'm aware of markets where LIHTC has come in and landlords have had to lower their rents because suddenly they're not the only game in town.
We're working. Yeah. That would be a very big shift in the type of units that we built, right? I don't think, I don't know, just looking at RCAP funding and everything, I don't think there'd be any reasonable size that could have such an impact. LIHTC project would have it just having to be a more traditional apartment style.
Yes.
Thing. It's just not true.
No, 40 or 50.
Yeah, it has 40 or 50 people who, yeah, exactly.
People in art.
Yeah.
Is the Fading West development still on track? Brilliance?
Yes.
You know?
The phase 3?
Yeah.
Oh. No, that's contingent on us getting through phase 1 and 2.
That would be a big dent.
Yeah, and I took some of that into account in the projections, but I have a table in there of what I believe, but it's probably, it's my, maybe not like current as of today, of what phase, what I only put in, I only counted the units that I thought were kind of a sure thing, or so there's a lot of variability in what's going to get developed here. Yeah, yeah.
I think that's really what's.
We'll take time to read this. Feel free to and give us lots of constructive criticism. That's what we're looking for. We want to make this work for you all. And think forward about how you're going to use this, both like in a housing action plan as well as, you know, to go after funding. So make sure you get
Perhaps find a way in the analysis report to include statistics specifically on homelessness more.
Sure. Yeah, I'll ask our team. I wasn't the one who did the homeless work, but I'll double check. Yeah.
Because you do all have the data, so this is
Okay, we can definitely do that. I mean, we can take out the precariously housed and do a little more too. So, yep, absolutely. Those are the kind of comments we're looking for. Thank you for all your thoughtful contributions. Appreciate it. Awesome. Yeah, it's so great.